philosophy, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
One of the things we talk about here on Point of View is how to articulate a biblical worldview and how to defend a biblical worldview. That gets you into topics like worldview and apologetics. And so there is no better person sometimes to bring to this microphone than Dr. Sean McDowell. He is assistant professor of Christian apologetics at Biola. In the past, we've interviewed him when he has been a teacher at San Juan Capistrano, won the Educator of the Year award back then. He is a graduate of Talbot Theological Seminary with a summa cum laude, as well as having now his PhD in apologetics and worldview studies from Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. Author of many books. We'll spend a little bit of time today talking a book he co-authored with John Stonestreet on same-sex marriage. In the past, we've talked about Is God Just a Human Invention, which he co-authored with Jonathan Morrow, and a number of books that he's co-authored with his father, Josh McDowell. And we are privileged to have Sean McDowell in studio.
Kerby, thanks for having me back.
It is so great to see you. And you're speaking tonight at a local church, but for people around the country, they get a chance to hear from you. So this is just a great opportunity. And you now teach on apologetics. You get a chance at the university level at Biola. So again, great plug for any young person thinking about maybe wanting to study God's Word and understand how to defend their faith. They can go and actually sit under your teaching there at Biola University.
Well, I taught high school full-time for a decade. I still do it part-time, but now I'm at Biola in our graduate program, an MA in Christian apologetics, and we have a distance program that is just fantastic. We have people, novices in apologetics and experts, coming to just study and learn how to defend their faith and become a nuisance in the culture.
And I remember when you actually taught high school, and I know you still teach a Sunday school class and things like that, you'd not just teach in the classroom, you take the kids up to UC Berkeley, where I was born, and take them to a very intense situations. You take them to an atheist presentation and give them a chance to, in real-life situations, try all these various arguments out.
Well, I believe it's important to learn apologetics and study and listen to shows like this and read the books you talk about, but we need to get out there and actually do it. So I take students out of their comfort zone. We bring in atheists, we bring in agnostics, we've brought in some homosexual activists at times,
yes,
and I teach my students how to be loving and gracious, but also how to stand up for truth.
Well, again, Sean McDowell in studio with us today, which means not only can you listen to the broadcast, you can watch it as well. And later on, if you would like to pass it on to someone, you could send them the podcast or the live cast on our YouTube channel, and you can see what we have in studio, and I'll let some of you see what he's wearing here in studio, so you'll have a little bit of fun seeing how he's dressed today, and we always have a lot of fun, and certainly will encourage your questions in just a few minutes. 1-800-351-1212. Before we get into some of the things you've written, I thought we'd talk about something that you wrote a foreword for, and that is just a week ago we had Bobby Conway, actually by phone, Doubting Towards Faith. And in your blog, which we have a link to at our website, there's a great little story that you tell, and it's both in the foreword and in your blog, about the fact that even though you grew up in a Christian home and you went to Christian conferences and certainly were given a lot of opportunity to learn about the Christian faith, by the time you hit college, you said, is this all true? I mean, if I was growing up in a different home, would I still believe this? Is Jesus the only way? And so you began to have some doubts, and I'm glad that you share that.
Well, thanks for asking me. Part of my doubts only make sense in light of, my dad, who you mentioned in the introduction, Josh McDowell, just with Crew, Campus Crusade for Christ, 53 years, written a ton of books defending the faith, and all of a sudden I find myself in college really just deciding to read all sides of the issue and explore truth, and it was really unsettling to me. It wasn't just a head game. I remember feeling the weight of, what if I don't believe this?
Yes.
So I knew I needed to be honest with my dad. So we were in Breckenridge, Colorado, up in the mountains, beautiful ski town. And we sat down over coffee, and I just said, Dad, I want to know truth, but I don't know that I'm convinced Christianity is entirely true, having no idea what this great defender of the faith would say to me. And he didn't even miss a beat. He looked at me and said, Son, I think that's great. And my first thought was, did you just hear anything I said, Dad? And he goes, son, I sense you want to know truth. If you really seek after truth, I think you'll be led back to Jesus because he is the truth. He said, don't reject the things you've learned growing up just to rebel, as so many people do who grow up in Christian homes or really any kind of home. He said, seek after truth, and your mom and I will love you no matter what. And I don't want to over dramatize my experience, but it was a really turning time for me to really say, all right, I'm going to follow what's true. I'm going to believe it. And I wrote that blog about Bobby's book because I really say, doubt is not a bad thing. In the church, sometimes we freak out when people have doubt. When students come to me and say they have doubt, I say, this is fantastic, because now you see the gravity and the weight and the importance of these issues, and you're motivated to really explore them.
There is a point in time, and having taught in high school and now teaching in a college and graduate level, you see that, and it happens at different times, but oftentimes as young people go off to college, they have to ask, do I accept my parents' faith? And even if I do, I have to make it my own. And so I think everybody that is actually able to breathe and live in this planet is going to have some kind of doubt. And if you're a Christian, don't have some doubt, well, we can, in the next couple of minutes, plant some if you want. But the point is that that's really a very important growth process. And parents sometimes don't realize that in order for them to take your faith and make it their own, they have to ask some very important questions.
Yeah, doubt is not the opposite of faith. Unbelief is. You can doubt and also believe. That's why it says in Jude 22, have mercy on those who doubt. So obviously we are wired differently. Sometimes I look at my friends I have a pastor friend who has the gift of faith and he just seems to never doubt. Yeah. And sometimes I envy that. But I also realize that it's because I have doubts and questions. It motivates me to read, to study, and to just take a deeper look at issues than maybe some other people do. And that's my contribution to the body of Christ. So I encourage parents, number one, really build that relationship. So when your kids are struggling, they will come to you, they will express that, you can care for them through that time. And also don't freak out. Don't see this as a personal attack. Try to see this as an opportunity to help your kids go deeper. And that's what my dad did. And I actually asked him briefly, maybe a year or two ago, so years after this stage when I questioned it, I said, Dad, what were you really thinking when I doubted? And he said, I was confident you'd come back. I said, why? He said, because of the depth of relationship that you and I had. And it just shows that relationship is so important. Yes. And doubt can be a positive thing.
Well, and he's talked about rules without relationship leads to rebellion. So if you have a good relationship, that's part of it. And there is a value in which going through a doubt and coming out the other side of it is important. We've had William Lane Craig, who you know, on this program. He said, one of the things I would even encourage people to think about is take something that you've got a big question about and research it. And again, even before we did the program today, we were talking about the fact we're sort of in the golden age of apologetics. There are books to read, there are videos to watch, there are all sorts of audio that you can begin to download and investigate that. And then when you find that answer and it makes sense to you, you'll have a much stronger faith. So I think doubt can be something that we actually be faith building, can it?
I agree. It's important to, when we doubt, to realize there's intellectual doubt, and there can be emotional doubt, there can be moral doubt. And whenever people have questions, they tend to think it's just intellectual. I had a student this week saying he had doubts. I said, let's make sure we understand where these doubts are really coming from. And he looked at me and said, there's probably some moral issues behind this. Yeah. There's probably some emotional issues. So we can approach doubt in a holistic way.
We're going to take a break. When we come back, we'll get into some other issues. But I thought I'd just mention that. We certainly thought that conversation about doubt was very important. But a lot of you will have questions about one of the books we've talked about with Sean McDowell before, Same-Sex Marriage, A Thoughtful Approach to God's Design on Marriage, as well as some other questions you might have on apologetics. All that coming up right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Most people who've seen some of the videos of Planned Parenthood are rightfully disturbed by the images of women haggling over prices and explaining how to crush babies in order to get baby parts to sell. That doesn't seem to bother the medical elite. The editor of the New England Journal of Medicine wrote an editorial this month to criticize the Center for Medical Progress for making the videos. That's right, criticize the people who made the videos. Don't criticize the Planned Parenthood women in the videos. Wesley J. Smith tries to explain in a recent column why the medical elite has been silent about the videos and why some even try to defend Planned Parenthood. The The issue comes down to worldview. Many of these media elite do not consider an unborn child a person, thus they have little or no concern about the morality of abortion or fetal harvesting. Smith argues in his writings that the medical elite's view of life is based upon each individual's cognitive capacities. In other words, you're not a person unless you are coherent and have self-awareness. Therefore, an embryo or a fetus is not a person. Of course, you could also apply that to a born infant, and it can also apply to people who have lost their mental capacities, such as patients in a coma or patients with Alzheimer's. He argues under this particular view, non-persons have no right to life. Abortion is merely about a woman's choice, but not a moral decision about two lives, the mother's life and the baby's life. He also points out that this view can be used and has been used to justify infanticide. Once you understand this worldview issue, you can see why so many in the medical community haven't spoken up about the Planned Parenthood videos. If you don't believe that there is life in the womb, then there is no moral issue to consider. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Giving Films, 90 Minutes in Heaven, based on a true story, in theaters September 11th, rated PG-13. More information at 90minutesinheaventhemovie.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We're privileged to have Dr. Sean McDowell in studio with us today. And you can watch the broadcast. We've already had at least one comment about what he's wearing. And so if you'd like to go to your computer and check that out and see what it looks like when we're in studio, you can listen in or watch as well, or pick it up a little bit later. Don't forget, we have it on our YouTube channel. And if this is something that maybe would be helpful to someone that you know, we have, first of all, a link to Sean McDowell's website. And that is something that you just click on his picture. It'll take you to seanmcdowell.org. And we have all the information there, and so you can follow him there. You can also, of course, find his book and certainly all these videos. And you can even hit that share button and send it to somebody else. You know, I saw this interview, and you might be interested in that. So use this in every possible way so that you can be more effective in your ministry that you have with others. You know, while we're talking about apologetics, we're going to get to same-sex marriage in just a minute. How we answer questions are important. What are some of the big issues that you're dealing with now? As a professor of Christian apologetics, you kind of know what the big five are. What are some of those that you're running into?
Well, there are staple issues that don't go away. Questions like intelligent design, questions about the historical Jesus, the resurrection. But the big questions I get now, one, are about the exclusivity of Christ. Yes. Is Jesus the only way? That's a big question. And then the other ones really tend to be moral kinds of issues, in particular related to issues of sexuality.
Yeah.
So questions on the issue of homosexuality, the transgender issue comes up a lot, same-sex marriage, but I would say more so moral issues. Hell seems to still come up a lot. That's debated, and young people will ask me about that. But I'd say moral issues tend to be the first questions. If I'm speaking to junior high to college, I open up for questions. I'll get a question on sexuality in the first two or three every single time.
Yes. You know, when I speak, I find that same thing. Now, added to that, since I'm known as an issues guy, they'll also ask about ISIS or Islam or a few things like that. But the sexual issues have always been sort of perennial issues, and they have surfaced in ways that never have been seen before. And I know that's why you and John Stonestreet wrote this book, Same-Sex Marriage, because you're sort of moving from the old question, what if, to what now? And that is a remarkable shift, and that has resulted in all sorts of conversations we've had around this table, especially when we do our Friday kind of religious liberty update, where we're finding that this is a big issue, and Christians are going to have to think through how they're going to respond to these issues if they're a county clerk, or if they're a baker, or a florist, or if they're wanting to be invited to a same-sex marriage ceremony. These are the reason you wrote the book, isn't it?
Well, we saw the Supreme Court ruling coming. We're not surprised by it. Reason we said, same-sex marriage, what now? Because a lot of books were like, same-sex marriage, oh no, the sky is falling. Same-sex marriage, no, it's not going to happen. John and I just said, it's here, and it's coming. And we need to have a truthful response, but we need to have a gracious, informed, kind response to this and not be caught off guard. So we just felt like there were not a lot of voices speaking into this issue that could really get to the heart of what's actually at stake. What is this debate about? Where have we come from? Why do we find ourselves here? And where do we go into the future? And for me, it was a big question to write this book. I have a mutual friend that you and I know. I won't mention his name, but he lost a job over writing a book specifically related to this issue. We've also seen some of the religious, issues come up about people, whatever, baking cakes, or the Kim Davis issue. Can it cost a Christian something for holding their conviction? So I remember going to my wife saying, man, this issue, we've got to address this. But do I really want to speak into this? And I did my dissertation on the fate of the apostles, what really happened to Peter and Paul and Andrew.
Wow.
And
I want to read that.
And it's coming out next month. We can come back on and talk about it.
I'm ready.
And what amazed me, though, is if you just look at the beginning of Acts, the apostles are threatened. The apostles are beaten. They're thrown in prison. And we see Stephen and James killed. And in Acts 5, at the beginning of this, they tell Peter, just stop talking about Jesus. And he says in Acts 5:29, we must obey God rather than men. And it just hit me that even Martin Luther said a gospel that does not address the issues of the day is not really the gospel. So we weighed in on this. And so far the result has been positive. I got plenty of hateful emails and responses from people, but overwhelmingly, I think people want to think clearly about this. They want to speak graciously about it, and they want to know what to do when they hit these real practical, difficult scenarios.
Well, again, I would say that if you want to really develop a kind of an apologetic or a way to respond in a gracious but biblical way, this is the book. If you want to understand some about the legal issue, I think Ryan Anderson's books have been really very helpful there. But one of the things that you do, Sean, and you and I have talked about this before as well, is that in a culture that is biblically illiterate, or if you're trying to make your case before an individual or a city council or a state legislature that doesn't start with a biblical presupposition, you've got to sort of back up a little bit. It's sort of more like Acts 17, isn't it? And that requires us to begin to make common sense arguments that would make sense to a person, whether they accept the Bible or not.
Kerby, I've quoted you many times, and maybe you've heard me quote you, where you say, I don't reason from the Bible, I reason to the Bible, especially with a secular audience that doesn't hold the Bible as authoritative. And I think that's right. Now, we know there's certain things that are true in the Bible. We can take them for granted and apply them, but we have to reason in a way without saying, well, Matthew 19 says this, therefore it's the marriage we should adopt.
Yeah.
So the question we really ask in this book is we say, before you can tell somebody that they're just being unequal, before you can tell someone they're bigoted and homophobic and hateful, you have to define what marriage is. We can only call discrimination against marriage once we define what marriage actually is. So we go back and we do make a case in there biblically for chapter, but we also make a case outside of the scriptures, looking at biology, looking at philosophy, looking at the nature of the marriage relationship that is distinct. And once we define what marriage is, then we can set aside some of these charges that people say. So we want to make a case for marriage. And one of the arguments we make is we quote Maggie Gallagher. And she says in there, 3 points. She says, number 1, sex makes babies. Mm-hmm. Number 2, society needs babies. And number 3, babies need a mom and a dad. And it's so simple, and yet if you take those one by one, sex makes babies. Now that's obvious, but we're moving in a culture where what's happened, one of the reasons that same-sex marriage is here is we have completely as a culture divorced sex from having babies. So we need to remind people that sex is a procreative kind of act, Number two, society needs babies. The reason the government has gotten interested in marriage in the first place is because marriage with a man and a woman is the best natural institution that raises up kids. And as marriage breaks down, the government has to step in and fill that role that the family's meant to fulfill. And then the third one is that babies need a mom and a dad. Just sociologically looking, we can see that moms add something unique and dads add something unique. Right. And we know this intuitively. I mean, even people who go against us, for example, President Obama has come out in favor of same-sex marriage publicly. But interestingly, in the last Supreme Court, the last two nominees for the Supreme Court were women. Now think about that. In same-sex marriage, you say kids don't need a mom and a dad. Two moms or two dads are equivalent. Males and females do not add something distinct and unique. Yet when it comes to the Supreme Court, he said we need women and we need men because they bring something different to the court.
Great argument.
So people just intuitively know, even if they don't admit it, even if they don't want to, that there's something unique about men and women. You quoted Ryan Anderson, and he said in his book, he said, there's not parenting, there's mothering, and there's fathering. Mm-hmm. And that's part of the case we need to make.
Well, and I think it's also helpful that if you look at some of the literature, and they have collected this at the Heritage Foundation, they've collected this at Family Research Council and others, and we're talking about journals, and you recently interviewed your dad about where to get good information. Well, if you are a professor and you write in a journal, and it's a refereed journal, and other people look at it, and it stands the test of time, that's pretty good. Well, they have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of various articles that have come out all over these years, and they come to one basic biblical conclusion, that children do the best in a family where there's a father and a mother. And these are written in many cases by individuals that could not possibly sign the doctrinal statement of anybody's church, but nevertheless, they have to admit that. So those 3 points are really key, and we need to take a break. So when we come back, I want to give some of you a chance, if you'd like to join the conversation today. When you have Sean McDowell in studio, you want to open up the phones, so we'll certainly take some of your phone calls. If you have questions about how to defend your faith, apologetics, or about this issue of same-sex marriage, 1-800-351-1212. And we have some very important pieces of material for you today. The first, of course, is if you click on his picture there, it will take you to seanmcdowell.org. If you click on the picture of his book, there's a place for you to order it. Now, you can look for it in your local bookstore, and I would certainly recommend that you look for it there first. It's published by Baker Books, but if not, we've made it possible for you to get a paperback or Kindle edition, and it's all available at our website, pointofview.net. But if you'd like to join the conversation today, let's open up the phones, too. 1-800-351-1212. Such a privilege to have Sean McDowell in studio with us. We'll be back with him and you right after this.
As the great American philosopher Elvis Presley once said, when things go wrong, don't go with them. Now, I don't know what you think about Elvis. The point I want to drive home, yes, it's been a difficult year, but instead of giving up, we should double up. Double our efforts to communicate the truth about Jesus Christ. Double our time countering the false views around us. And double your partnership with Point of View, because helping you do those things is a big part of our mission. Now through September 30th, a gracious friend of the ministry is going to double your support on his own. So when I said I want you to double your partnership, do I want you to dig even deeper? Absolutely. But no matter what you give, up to $50,000, this friend will double that. So double up. This is a great time to make your first gift ever. Call 800-347-5151 or give online at pointofview.net. Please don't fret. Invest. Pray. Let's do this. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Privileged to have in studio with us today Dr. Sean McDowell, and if you'd like to join our conversation, lines are filling up, but we still, I think, have room for one of you. 1-800-351-1212. If all the lines fill up and you get a busy signal, just wait till a caller drops off and you can join us. Most of the calls I can see here want to address this issue of same-sex marriage or homosexuality, but of course we'll certainly take calls on other issues, because when you have Sean McDowell in studio, you want to make it available for as many people as possible. Let's head to Georgia first. Is it Antoine? Thank you for calling today.
Yes, how you doing, Kerby?
Very good. What would you like to say?
Well, yes. First of all, I'd just like to comment and say that I'm not against any homosexuals or same-sex marriage, but we have to remember that back in Sodom and Gomorrah days, a lot of that went on, and we also have to remember it tells us clearly in Romans 1, starting in chapter 1, verse 18. When men decided to do that, God gave us a debased mind, and they started doing things like that. So it's just my thing is that we have to go back to the Bible, and God didn't intend for a same-sex marriage. He wanted a man and a woman to reproduce and to be able to raise kids. I mean, because when you get a child and you have women, 2 women or 2 men raising that child, that's total confusement for that child.
Sure. Well, let me give, if anything, Sean a chance to respond. In your book, Same-Sex Marriage, you have a chapter, What Does God Think About Marriage? But another chapter, Leaving God Out. We've talked about kind of leaving God out, how you could make, I think, a common sense argument. But when you look at Romans 1, or you look at Leviticus 18 and 20, or you look at Genesis 19, whatever passage, 1 Corinthians 7, other passages, there are some pretty powerful and convincing biblical arguments too, aren't there?
Yeah, Antoine, thanks for bringing us back to what Scripture says about this. It's important culturally and in particular for Christians. To me, the important thing in this issue is to look at the whole sweeping approach that Scripture has. You go back to Genesis 1, and the Bible says God made them male and female and commanded them to multiply and fill the earth. And then in Genesis 2, it says, the man shall leave his father and mother, bond with his wife, and the two shall become one. So we see from the very beginning in Genesis that God has set up marriage and sexuality to be between one man and one woman in a committed, loving relationship for life. Now that is kind of repeated and taken for granted in Leviticus 18. It's part of the underlying story when you look at the Sodom and Gomorrah that you mentioned in Genesis. We see also that in Romans and 1 Corinthians chapter 6. So when we look at this issue, we could debate the particulars of Leviticus, and that would take us way far to the side. But I just want to bring us back and say, clearly what the Bible is saying is that there's a design, male and female, and sex is met between one man and one woman in a committed relationship for life. Now, Jesus weighs in on this as well. In Matthew 19, he's asked about divorce, and he quotes Genesis chapter 1 that says God has made them male and female, and then he quotes Genesis chapter 2 that the two shall become one. So Jesus is affirming this idea that marriage and sexual relationships are between one man and one woman in a committed relationship for life. And that's still important, because I've been called a lot of names for holding a traditional view on marriage. And oftentimes what I'll say, do you think Jesus was loving? And still in most people's minds, they'll say yes. I'll say, if Jesus could hold this view of marriage and be loving, then how come I can't hold at least the same view of marriage that he held? So playing that Jesus card, I think, is an effective way to go.
But also is a good answer to something I used to see since I grew up around gay pride parades and things like that. They used to have these signs that say what Jesus said about homosexuality, and the rest of the sign was blank. You just helped us answer. If I go to Matthew 5, Matthew 19, I got some answers for that. So it's a good response. Let me, if I can, take another call here that kind of gets us into another issue in your book. And so we'll head out to Kentucky this time. WYGE. Anthony, you have the floor.
Yes, how are y'all today?
Very good. What would you like to add?
I have a question that regards, like other members of my church and such. I have, there's a few members in the church I attend that stand out and in support of gay marriage, and I just, want to know how to address those individuals, when I speak with them on, about that subject.
Sure. And again, that's a big issue. As a matter of fact, some will say, well, maybe you're misinterpreting Romans 1, or maybe Romans 1 and maybe Paul was just biased, or that's the Old Testament of Leviticus 18 and 20 or something like that. How do we respond to that?
Well, there's a couple things that I'd encourage you to do, Anthony. Number one is to really get informed on this issue. Read the issues, know what you're talking about, and you might already be there, but for the rest of our listeners, understand the issue, whether it's my book, Same-Sex Marriage, whether it's Ryan Anderson's book, Truth Overruled, whether it's Kevin DeYoung's recent book, What the Bible Really Says About Homosexuality. Take the time to really study and be informed on this. Second, I would go to the pastoral staff and the leadership and just say, what is our position as a church? How do we stand on this? Where is the church going? And let them know some of your concerns and get their advice, how they think you should approach and discuss this issue within the church. And then third, if these people are friends of yours in relationships, I wouldn't bring it up over a Thanksgiving meal. I wouldn't bring it up at an inopportune time, but just say, can we talk about this? I'm willing to hear you out if you're willing to hear me out as well. Those are the three things I would do initially in approaching this.
Let's go to California. Rose, what would you like to add to it? Rose, go ahead.
Yes, it's amazing that, we have all these kind of give their take or feel about it. But we have the book, and it's all about what God says. And we just simply have to read what God says about every issue on every account and hold people accountable. If the church had actually stood up, like the homosexuals demanded their right to be married, and all the others, the people for abortions and all of that, these things wouldn't even be. And I believe that's the reason why America's in trouble, because the church sat back on their hands and did nothing about it in their complacency and their neglect to know the word for what the word says. All we need to do is have the word. We don't need...
Okay. I just want, just before I take a break here, give you a chance to respond a little bit to, it seems to me the church needs to address those issues.
Well, I would say a couple things the church needs to do. In our book, Same-Sex Marriage, the first thing John and I say is, as a church, we need to repent of our own sexual failures, whether it's the issue of abortion, whether it's the issue of divorce, whether it's the issue of pornography. Before we point fingers at other people, we need to take an honest look in the inside. And it's only when we're aware of our own faults and our own hypocrisy at times that I think we can have compassion and love towards those who see this issue separately. Second, Rose is right that what the Bible says matters, but I don't think it's enough now just to take, here's what the Bible says to people. One, because there's some very sophisticated arguments that are made from those who take the revisionist position. I've been to some of these conferences and I've had these conversations. I don't think most pastors and many people are ready without doing some homework to respond to these. So yes, we got to go back to the Bible, but we got to do our homework on this. We've got to be ready with a thoughtful response as well.
You know, you have kind of a 6-point to-do list for the church, and I thought I'd pick out one other one, and that is to tell the truth about the difference between same-sex attraction and same-sex marriage, because there has been maybe a loose way in which people are preaching or speaking about this. There is a very significant difference between temptation and sin, to put it bluntly, and there's a difference between feeling attraction or dealing with it or struggling with it and codifying it into law, too.
Yeah, it's interesting. Mark Yarhouse is a psychologist, and he's written a bunch on this. And he makes 3 distinctions that I think are helpful. He says, number 1 is what we'll call same-sex attraction, when somebody finds himself, for whatever reason, attracted to the same sex. Second is same-sex sexual orientation. Third is identity. Yeah. And those are very, very different things, and we have to keep those straight. And then also is the question of marriage is not directly tied to the issue of homosexuality. It's a question of what is marriage and why has the government chosen to sanction the male-female union as marriage throughout the history of the world. That's an important question we can't ignore.
Again, if you want to learn a little bit more about how to make a convincing case and to do it in a way that's gracious, and at the same time recognize that the church sometimes, well-meaning Christians sometimes, have said the wrong thing. And if you want some guidance, because in this last chapter you have guidance on all sorts of questions. What if I've invited to a same-sex ceremony? What do I do? What if a gay friend or coworker announces that they're going to get married? What should I do if somebody asks me to perform a service? You've really spent some time thinking through the issues, and so this is a manual that I do want to commend to you. And, of course, it's just one of many books by Sean McDowell, and you can find out more by going to our website and his website. But let's take a break. We'll come back with more right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Dr. Sean McDowell with us for just a few more minutes. And again, let me commend you all sorts of books. Today we're talking about same-sex marriage, but let me mention his book, Ethics, Is God Just a Human Invention? Of course, a book that he co-authored with Josh McDowell, Evidence for the Resurrection. Perhaps the opus, The Unshakable Truth, as well as the updated Evidence That Demands a Verdict, and much more. One coming out on the fate of the apostles, which I've spoken on a little bit. And you kind of wonder, is the stories true about Thomas and some of the others? So I cannot wait to read that book. You will be booked by phone, I know, in the next, when that book comes out. So I'm looking forward to it. But let's take at least one or two more phone calls. We'll head up to Ohio this time. Krista, thank you for joining us. You're on with Sean McDowell.
Oh, I am a long-time listener, first-time caller. I listen to you guys every day on my way to work. But I guess in listening today, I kind of just struggle with this line between grace and truth. And I sometimes feel like the church is more apt to come at, people who struggle with homosexuality and, try to, quote-unquote, fix them or fix the issues where, we could have somebody that is, in a relationship with somebody of the opposite sex having, premarital sex, and we're not as apt to say something to them out loud, or I guess I just feel like a lot of homosexuals don't come to church or even try to make changes because we're coming at them the wrong way.
Well said.
Or
yeah, Sean, let's give Sean a chance.
Struggle.
Yeah. Well, again, first of all, the church hasn't addressed some of those issues, and it should have. And number two, can we make a church a welcoming place for an individual that maybe is struggling with some kind of same-sex attraction, but isn't necessarily completely sold out to the lifestyle? What would you say?
Kristen, I'd say a couple things. Thanks for your call. I, too, deeply feel the tension between grace and truth on this issue, probably more so than any other issue that I've ever had to deal with, personally as well as kind of academically and in writing. And when I look at the church, you're right, we haven't always been consistent. We've made mistakes. We have not always treated gay people and lesbians the way we should treat them. And the times that we've done that, that should break our heart, and it should draw us to repentance. I get to travel around the country and be at a lot of churches. I was just at one in Santa Cruz this past week, and can I tell you, there's churches who make mistakes, and there's churches who are on the wrong side of this, but there really are a lot of churches who are being consistent on issues of premarital sex, being consistent on issues of cohabitation, on issues of divorce and remarriage, and also creating a culture where people of all sorts of faiths and gays and lesbians are welcome to come and be there. In fact, at this church, there were they asked me to speak on the issue of homosexuality, and they told me, they said, there will be a number of gay people, a number of lesbians here. I said, great, that's excellent. I said, why are they coming to the church? They said, you know what? Because we preach the gospel, but we also treat them with dignity and treat them with respect. Now, when it comes to membership, absolutely they have certain criteria, and the people understand that, but they have found a way within their church to love people with same-sex attraction without compromising the gospel, and that's the goal, as difficult as it is, that we really have to strive for.
So again, I think that's a good opportunity. Krista, any follow-up?
No, I just, would it talk about those things in your book on just how to maybe make an impact in our church, with others around us, to be more welcoming, but also, walk that line between grace and truth?
We do, Kristen, and we talk about historically, how do we get here? We talk about how to make a case biblically, how to make a case non-biblically, but also how can the church respond? And the first big things we respond are about repentance, about truly loving people, and then at the very end, we walk through probably 10 or 15 specific scenarios that you might find yourself in today, and our whole goal is how do we respond with grace, and how do we respond with truth?
Very good. Just before we run out of time, first of all, I wanted to mention your website, seanmcdowell.org, and you have a lot of blog posts. And first of all, I would say that some of those are ones you can read, others are where you can watch. And so that is a great opportunity. And you've, I think, learned the same thing we have as we've now launched our new Relevant Minute, the Relevant Minute, because we recognize that sometimes a young person is more likely to just read something for a minute or watch a video for a minute. And so we take some of the material we cover here on Point of View and put it there, and you've done just an outstanding job. So let's, if we can, point people to your website, and also talk about how if they watch one of those, then they can click on a button and send it to someone else. We also have a link to your Twitter feed, and I have actually found some really good articles over the years by following Sean McDowell on Twitter, okay, Facebook and others. But talk about what's available for some of our listeners out there.
Sure. My whole goal is just to equip people with some of the big challenges of the day, so much like Point of View. So every week I do 2 or 3 blogs, and they tend to have a lot of content, but also be short. I mean, a page and a half at most. I did one this past week on does marijuana affect the teenage brain. I just this morning reviewed a recent book called Aborting Aristotle, which is in defense of the pro-life
We'll have
position.
Dave Sheridan studio sitting in that chair just about a week or so.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Fascinating
Great
book. I also have a video just once a week. It's a 2 to 3 minute video, either on something taking place in culture or just a big tough issue. Like I'll be releasing one this week, If God, Why Is There Evil? And just 2 quick thoughts within 3 minutes. And the Twitter feed, and you can get all the books there. So it's just a resource for students and parents, a lot like Point of View, to be equipped today to tackle some of the big tough questions that we face as Christians.
And as an assistant professor, I would be remiss if I did not talk about Biola and Talbot for just a minute. Certainly, of course, you graduated from Talbot and you are a professor there at Biola. This is an opportunity for some of the listeners out here to say, I'd like to learn a little bit more, but I'm not sure I can move to California. But the good news is there's distance learning. So talk about if indeed a young person wanted to go to school or maybe get a seminary kind of education or apologetic degree, they could certainly come. But also there's some great opportunities for anybody listening right now to learn from you.
2 big resources I'd recommend. Number 1 is we have an MA in Christian Apologetics. It's 36 units. It's for working professionals. Actually, we have some stay-at-home moms. We have doctors, teachers, lawyers, business people. They come out for 2 weeks, 2 times. The rest is all by distance. And we just get incredible feedback, and people love it. So it's very doable for the busy person who doesn't want to move to California. A great, top-rated program in the country. Second for students, I know you're a big believer in this, is Summit Ministries. It's a 2-week worldview boot camp for students, but it's fun. We have one now at Biola the last 12 days in June. I'm there the whole time hanging out with students teaching. We bring in some of the top teachers in the world to talk about all the issues you talk about on Point of View, the marriage issue, the abortion issue, does God exist, economics. So if you're 16 to 23 and you want to go deeper in your faith, that is the number one thing I would recommend for you to do is to come at Summit. And you can actually just check it out at summit.org.
And we have a link there. And of course, when we've had John Stone Street on, he's talked about that. Of course, he's got a new opportunity now, doesn't he, there with the Breakpoint and the Colson Center. So again, the co-author of the book. By the way, the book is written by Sean McDowell and John Stone Street, 2 excellent authors, and is published by Baker Books. You can look for it in your local bookstore. But we've given you an opportunity to order it online or to just download the Kindle. And I don't know about you, but I'm reading more and more on my iPad all the time, and I carry a lot of books around with me, either in my computer with Logos or, of course, in my iPad as well. So it's just been great to have you in studio today.
Kerby, thanks for having me on. The time just flies.
It certainly does. Fastest hour of your life. Just before we run out of time, visit the website, pointofview.net. If you'd like to know more about the book or some of those resources, it's available there. My commentary today on Planned Parenthood. We're going to get back to that next hour. Marjorie Dannenfelser is going to be with us with a Susan B. Anthony list, and we also have a take action item. The Senate is going to vote on the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act. So we're going to spend a little bit of time with her talking about that, but we've also sent you an email that should have arrived in your inbox by now, and we also have that take action item there as well. We also, of course, have the Planned Parenthood videos, and we'll talk more about that in the second hour. Been privileged to have with us today Sean McDowell. We'll take a break and come back with more right after this.
2015 hasn't exactly been a great year for the church in America. Some are saying the battle for the soul of the nation is over and we lost. But remember what the angels said right after Jesus ascended? Basically, they said, "What are you doing looking up in the sky? Yes, he's gone. He will come back one day, but in the meantime, get out there and be his witnesses." The church has faced many hard times, but God's not done with this world yet. It's critical that we know how to share what we believe and how to respond to the wrong ideas destroying people and our culture. What can you do? You can pray, and you can partner with Point of View. When you give by September 30th, one ministry friend will match your gift, $25, $100, $10,000. Your gift will be doubled up to a total of $50,000. Call now and give 1-800-347-5151 or online at pointofview.net. Now's not the time to give up. It's time to double up. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net.
Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, we're going to spend some time talking about a number of different issues, but first up is this idea of the Senate vote on the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act, as well as my commentary today on the Planned Parenthood videos. And we couldn't think of a better person to invite to address both of those issues than the president of the Susan B. Anthony list, that is Marjorie Dannenfelser. She is the president and even the original organizer of this list, which is a national pro-life group really dedicated to pursuing policies and electing candidates to reduce and ultimately end abortion. They've been successful in being able to elect more than 100 different pro-life candidates to the U.S. House of Representatives, 19 to the U.S. Senate, as well as other statewide races. And Marjorie, always great to have you on the program with us.
Kerby, I love being on your program, and let me just give you this compliment, and you can take it in the way that you would like to. You and NPR are my favorite program.
Well, it's kind of like Cal Thomas usually says, I read the New York Times and the Bible each day to see what both sides are doing. So I guess that works pretty well.
It's true.
It's
I'm
really
not
good.
kidding.
That's great. Wonderful story.
Yeah.
I love that. I'm going to have to use that again. But let's get into this.
Please.
First of all, before we get into the Senate vote, we also had some people wanting to defund have some of the medical elite. In particular, you had just the other day the editor of the New England Journal of Medicine criticizing the Center for Medical Progress and not criticizing Planned Parenthood. Oh, that makes sense. Let's criticize the people that make the videos rather than the women on the videos saying some very outrageous things. So any thoughts about where we're going in this area of defunding Planned Parenthood?
Well, you know what they say about the messenger. They're not always the most popular people, right?
Yes.
It's horrible. It's horrible. It's horrible evidence. It's horrible content because it is a horror. And what they've given, the Center for Medical Progress has given to the nation a reason to fight again on this. And it's because it points to the child. So every abortion argument, and including the most groundbreaking, the pain-capable bill, right now being debated, literally right now on the floor of the Senate, are informed by this. Because why? We're talking about who it is, what it is. We're not legislating around it, regulating around it, talking about who pays for it, under what conditions will you do this thing, who gets to sign off, what are the methods that are appropriate. You're talking about what it is in itself and what it is. It concerns the humanity of that little boy or that little girl that is waiting to be born. So these videos have informed every debate here moving ahead. We will never be the same. I pray and believe that we will never be the same because of these. And it came from the messenger that anyone could believe, the people who are perpetrating the actual crime.
Wow. Let's, if we can, then focus our time and attention now on the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act. We have sent out an email which allows any of our listeners to contact their two senators and urging them to support the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act. It's sponsored by Senator Lindsey Graham. And, of course, we have science that shows that a child feels pain. And this is not some kind of draconian measure that you would hear somebody talk about. We're talking about banning abortions after the beginning of the 5th month, something that many states have done anyway. And it seems to me that this is pretty common sense. And I think we should encourage all of our listeners to go to the website right now and contact by email their 2 United States senators. What are your thoughts?
That's right. That's right. Right now, because literally this is being debated on the floor as we speak. Dianne Feinstein just said a couple of minutes ago, there is no evidence that any child who was born at 20 weeks has ever been saved. And that's her refutation of her argument to save these children. In fact, literally, there's a family whose child was born at a gestation of 22 weeks. It's kind of how you market, it's how you lives and is. You know what? I'm telling you, this child who I love reminds me of my children when they were little. They were completely misbehaved in an adult setting. It's perfect. And they're all over the Senate side right now, going Senate office to Senate office. And they're showing the face of this child that is that was supposed to, and if it was a peer of that child, was given no chance to live. And Dianne Feinstein says there's no reason to fight for the humanity of that peer of that child. It's where, as you say, common sense and common humanity and compassion and justice all come together when you look at the face of that child and those videos, which is the opposite. It's the horror. And say, well, there's got to be a moment. There's got to be a place where we can come together as a nation, pro-choice, pro-life, pro-abortion, anti-choice, whatever you call us. Let's just agree on this thing. Otherwise, we are a different nation than we thought we were.
Is there any value in some of our listeners? For example, we have various radio stations in California, and you just mentioned their senator there, or listeners in New York or Vermont or Maine or Rhode Island. I can think of many places where our broadcast comes where it's pretty obvious that those senators are probably not going to vote for it. Is there still any value in letting those senators know about what you feel on this issue?
Right now is probably the most important moment that you could pick up the phone and call your U.S. senator, no matter where you're from. If your senator is a lover of life and is going to protect him, thank them. If your senator is fighting against this, you let him know what you think about that. Senator Collins in Maine is one of our main targets, so that is definitely a place to be communicating. We've sent thousands of friends from Maine to her office to communicate what they think. Also, Pennsylvania, Indiana, with Donnelly, Casey in Pennsylvania, Heidi Heitkamp in North Dakota, Alaska, Murkowski, and anywhere you're from.
Yeah,
anywhere
we have listeners
you're from.
in all those states. Yes.
Yes. And so, everyone, there have been many moments. We've been there before here together, Kerby, when a lot of our friends were saying, it just doesn't even matter. My senator this is one of those tipping point moments where your voice really does make a difference. And when believing really in to do any good thing, or they don't need to hear from me because they're already going to do the right thing. This is one of those tipping point moments where your voice really does make a difference. And when believing really in the miraculous nature of what is happening right now in the pro-life movement is so important. I would pick up the phone, and I am doing it myself. I also have my individual voice, but we can make that exponential and ask your friends. We've got a few hours here, and the actual vote is going to be tomorrow. So there's a little bit of time, but don't wait.
I would agree. Marjorie, I know that you're heading on to some other activities, but I just wanted to use this as an opportunity once again to challenge our listeners to go. We'll certainly encourage them to do that as well. And the vote is tomorrow, and the time to act is now. So thank you, as always, for partnering with us. Made it very easy for you to send an email, but of course you've also suggested that they make a phone call, and we'll certainly encourage them to do that as well. And the vote is tomorrow, and the time to act is now. So thank you, as always, for partnering with us, and thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Such a privilege. Thank you so much, Kerby.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, talk with the individual who actually produced the original screenplay and even received an Oscar nomination for Braveheart, as well as many other movies. We Were Soldiers, Pearl Harbor, Heaven is for Real. We'll talk with him right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Most people who've seen some of the videos of Planned Parenthood are rightfully disturbed by the images of women haggling over prices and explaining how to crush babies in order to get baby parts to sell. That doesn't seem to bother the medical elite. The editor of the New England Journal of Medicine wrote an editorial this month to criticize the Center for Medical Progress for making the videos. That's right, criticize the people who made the videos. Don't criticize the Planned Parenthood women in the videos. Wesley J. Smith tries to explain in a recent column why the medical elite has been silent about the videos and why some even try to defend Planned Parenthood. The issue comes down to worldview. Many of these media elite do not consider an unborn child a person, thus they have little or no concern about the morality of abortion or fetal harvesting. Smith argues in his writings that the medical elite's view of life is based upon each individual's cognitive capacities. In other words, you're not a person unless you are coherent and have self-awareness. Therefore, an embryo or a fetus is not a person. Of course, you could also apply that to a born infant, and it can also apply to people who have lost their mental capacities, such as patients in a coma or patients with Alzheimer's. He argues under this particular view, non-persons have no right to life. Abortion is merely about a woman's choice, but not a moral decision about two lives, the mother's life and the baby's life. He also points out that this view can be used and has been used to justify infanticide. Once you understand this worldview issue, you can see why so many in the medical community haven't spoken up about the Planned Parenthood videos. If you don't believe that there is life in the womb, then there is no moral issue to consider. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Giving Films, 90 Minutes in Heaven, based on a true story, in theaters September 11th, rated PG-13. More information at 90minutesinheaventhemovie.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Let me ask you a question. Have you ever seen the movie Braveheart or heard about it or maybe know something about it? Well, if that is the case, then certainly you're going to appreciate the conversation we're going to have right now. I might just mention the 20th anniversary digital edition of Braveheart is coming out, and that is something you want to pay attention to. But we are privileged to have with us today an individual that is a screenwriter, director, producer, novelist, and songwriter who actually came to prominence because of the writing of Braveheart, which turned into a film. Randall Wallace is with us, and in addition to Braveheart, of course, he has been behind a number of other films that you probably are familiar with. We Were Soldiers, Pearl Harbor, Secretariat, Heaven is for Real, to mention just a few. He's a graduate of Duke University, and as you read his new book, which is just fascinating, Living the Braveheart Life, you'll learn a little bit about what it was like to make a movie like this in Ireland, also to interview some of the Vietnam vets. You'll learn about the importance of fathers and sons and brothers and sisters, and he certainly weaves throughout the book his story, which also in some ways is a very interesting parallel to the story of William Wallace in Braveheart. So, Randall Wallace, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Kerby, it's great to be with you. Thank you.
You know, we have more recently interviewed some of the people behind movies. For example, the Kendrick brothers, and of course, War Room is doing very well right now in the box office. But you've been privileged over the years to have seen some very successful films, which are ones that do encourage people to want to be courageous, to actually focus on freedom, and to understand some of the spiritual issues that you've been addressing. So you've had quite an interesting life, and as I read through the book, you take the time to tell the story, not only of your life, but how the movie Braveheart came into being.
Yes, and I wanted to do this book not so much to look back at how the movie came about, though I do talk about that, but to look at what would it take for us now in modern times to live a life that's based on courage and faith and love, and to tell the stories that are exciting, that entertain us certainly, but that give us goosebumps, that bring tears to our own eyes and change our hearts so that we can change our lives. The kind of story that I would want to hand this book to my sons if I were to die tomorrow, that they would have it in their hands to say, this is the basis of the kind of life that I might live. This is everything my father knew about living in faith, and the kind of faith that transforms and makes a life worth living.
Well, again, you use examples from very successful surfers, or Bob, of course, from Afghanistan. So it's not just the story of you, but it's certainly the story of others, and we certainly will focus on some of that. But for just a minute, I think some people maybe are not familiar with how you came from living in Tennessee to actually decide to go and learn a little bit more about William Wallace, and to head out to Scotland and see what that might actually entail, and to write what, of course, is a very successful film known as Braveheart.
Yeah, Kerby, I grew up in Tennessee and grew up a Baptist, went to tent revivals my whole life. I calculated once that my sister and I were probably in church 20 hours a week, because church was the center of everything for us, not only Sunday mornings and Sunday evenings and Wednesdays, but the prayer meetings, the revivals. And I went to school in North Carolina, and for me to just choose to come to California was what I would call one of the first of my Braveheart moments.
Yes.
A moment that would say, I know no one in California, but I'm going to be okay. And I feel led to do it. I'm going to do it. And that was the way that I ended up going to Scotland. My wife was expecting, we were expecting our first child. We knew it would be a son. And she knew her entire family history. And I knew very little of mine beyond just my immediate grandparents and, of course, mother and father. And I wanted to know where my people had come from, and we went to Scotland and found a statue of a man named William Wallace. And in inquiring about this man, I heard, well, he's the greatest hero of Scotland.
Yes.
And I thought, how could he be the greatest hero, and I know nothing about him? And that story led me into this tale, which, to me, Christian that I am, struck me to be that what I was really telling when people say, what's the research you did? I say, well, I read the New Testament, because the life of William Wallace was a life of giving himself completely to faith, to the idea that his physical life was not important compared to his spiritual life, and it was that kind of life that had the power to transform everyone around him.
Well, and one of the things that you recognize is that your history goes back there, but even more recently, I know I read in there that your family, if you trace the family roots, fought on both sides of the Civil War. So, of course, you have a history not only all the way back to Scotland, but also here to the United States. And it does seem to me that sometimes learning from those who have gone before us, the book of Hebrews talks about that in Hebrews 12, that, those who've gone before us, really in a sense can provide a model. And so this is something that I know you wanted to pass on not only to our listeners today, but you have 3 sons. As you said, this is something you want to pass on to them so they understand what it means to be a courageous man and a spiritual man, right?
That's right, Kerby. And something that is so powerful to me in this is that this attitude and these stories are not simply for men. One of the things I've taught my sons and try to continue to teach them is that a Braveheart man is a man who honors women. If you don't honor women, you have no honor yourself. Women are sacred. Just as life is sacred, women are sacred. And a story that celebrates the kind of honor of women and the power of love that what women have to teach us is one that speaks powerfully to women. I tell the story in the book of a young woman who watched a screening of Braveheart, and
Yes.
I was to do a question and answer afterwards, and she was the first one to stand up. And she said, "Mr. Wallace, I don't have a question. I just want to tell you that my fiance died 6 months ago, and before he died, he told me he wanted me to see Braveheart.
Wow.
So I would understand the way he loved me." And us understanding how do we approach love in such a way that both men and women are transformed into a fuller and richer life.
Just before we take a break, I wanted to ask you one other question, and that is about calling. You use that phrase a number of times. You have chapters on a calling and a piano playing pig. I'll get into that in just a minute. But talk about this idea of calling, because that's important in the Christian life, and you talk about it in the book.
I believe God makes each of us special. We're all made in the image of God, and yet we're all made different. And that means that we're made for different ways, different reasons, different purposes, but all in the overall purpose of loving God. I went to my family pastor when I was wrestling with the idea of coming to California, and he knew that I was studying religion. It was my major study. I'd even gone to seminary. And
yes,
my pastor said, "Do you feel the call to be a pastor?" And I said, "No, though I know it's the greatest call anyone could have." And he looked at me and he said, "You're wrong. The greatest call you can have is the one God has for you." And it was, Kerby, it was as if he had knighted me and told me, go do what God has made you to do. Now, this doesn't mean to worship fame or money or success in the ways of the world, but if it is in your heart to be a storyteller and to find the kinds of stories that change your life as well as have the potential to change others, then find those stories and tell them. And it was one of the greatest moments of my life.
Going to take a break, and when we come back, talk a little bit more about some of these aspects of a Braveheart Life. And this is a book published by Thomas Nelson, and or Word W Publishing. Either way, it's an imprint of Thomas Nelson, and we have information about it on our website, pointofview.net. It's a book I'm pretty sure you'll be able to find in your local bookstore because it's going to have wide distribution. But if by chance you can't find it, we have a link to livingthebraveheartlife.com. Don't worry, it's already there. You just click on the picture there of Randall Wallace or of certainly the book, and it will take you there so you can get it. But if, of course, you want to find it in your local bookstore, that is the case. You can even download a free chapter so that you can learn a little bit more about it before you get it. But I know that it would be a real encouragement to you. And if you have certainly enjoyed some of these other films in addition to Braveheart, like We Were Soldiers and Secretariat and others, well, those are just a few that Randall Wallace has been behind. We wanted to give you a chance to know a little bit more about an individual behind some of those movies and encourage you to do what you can to follow your calling. We'll take a break and be back with more right after this.
From Provident Films and Affirm Films comes War Room. Tony and Elizabeth Jordan's marriage is turning into a battle, and their daughter is caught in the crossfire until Elizabeth meets Miss Clara.
This is my favorite place in this house. I call it my war room.
And learns that prayer is a powerful weapon. War Room. Now play. Rated PG. Parental guidance suggested. More information is available at warroomthemovie.com.
As you fight in your war room, please include Kerby and Point of View in your prayers. We have a very important opportunity right now. A wonderful friend has said that he will match every gift in September up to a total of $50,000. Point of View needs that support to keep equipping you for your life inside and outside your war room, both as you pray and as you live. So please call now and give generously. 1-800-347-5151 or online at pointofview.net. That's 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Randall Wallace with us today as we talk about his new book, Living the Braveheart Life. And if you have enjoyed some of the films like Braveheart or We Were Soldiers, Pearl Harbor, Secretariat, Heaven is for Real, just to mention a few, he was the genius or the intellectual firepower behind that, and is also a screenwriter, director, producer, novelist, and songwriter. So lots of things to cover today. Book is broken down into Part 1, Fathers and Sons, Part 2, The Road to Braveheart, Part 3, The Ways of the Warrior, which we'll get into in just a minute, Part 4, The Holes in Our Armor, and Part 5, Outlaw Christianity. A lot to cover, and we'll do our best in the time we have remaining. But, Randall, for just a minute, you also, there's another real good theme that runs through your book, and that is the importance of art and music. And as a writer, as a songwriter, and others, you certainly understand that. And that's something that we in the Christian community need to develop more of. I mean, sometimes we say, well, if you have a musical ability that can take place within the church, great, we've got a place for you. You know, you can play in the orchestra, you can play the organ or the piano, or you can sing. But we need to recognize the value of art. And as an individual that has done a great deal of writing and also some songwriting, I'd love to give you a chance just for a few minutes to challenge us as Christians to think about how to use our artistic talents.
Kerby, I think it's as important as anything we do in terms of worship. I think, in fact, that art is an act of worship, is an act of joy, and an act of faith. The faith part is the hope that something that we do will communicate with other people. But we're celebrating who we are, who God has made us to be, and the vision that God has given us to see. So I talk in the book about walking into a beautiful church with a friend who grew up a Muslim and another friend who is a member of Opus Dei, an extremely devout Catholic organization, that the three of us could go into this beautiful cathedral and feel the presence of God, feel the presence of Christ. I also think that telling stories, whether we do that through a picture or a narrative story, is a way we are sharing the Spirit of God and change, and we are changing lives that way, our own, in telling the story and the lives of others who are hearing the story. I think that's why Jesus told stories instead of talked about philosophy. Mm-hmm. And so to me, if I thought, okay, I want to have a book that you could give a young man or a young woman when they were going off to school or when they were graduating or when they were getting married, what would I want that book to do? And I would want to tell stories that inspired people. And as you mentioned songs, I think of Chris Christopherson, who had a great impact on my life. I didn't know him well, but I met him several times and met him at a pivotal moment when he encouraged me to leave school and enter the world of entertainment. He wrote a song called "Why Me, Lord," and I recently saw his description of where that came from, which is powerful and moving. But one of the things he says in that song is, maybe, Lord, I can show someone else what I've been through myself on my way back to you. And that, to me, is what we do in our art. And maybe our art is meeting people. Maybe it's smiling, telling, when I go to church and I see someone there that no one has spoken to, I always try to make a point of just going up and shaking their hand and welcoming them and saying, hello. That was part of my father's art. My father's art was, he loved people. He saw what he loved in them rather than what put him off. And we need to find what our gifts are and practice those gifts.
Very good. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. I know this is probably a program where for the last half hour here you want to just sit back and listen to Randall Wallace. You can certainly do so, but if we say something that maybe you'd like to ask a question about or make a comment, feel free to give us a call. You have a whole section here on the ways of the warrior. And Randall, one of the things I know is we have a lot of teachers. But even in Braveheart, you have Uncle Argyle, he's a teacher. But in there it says, the teacher teaches lessons, but they are seldom the ones the teacher thinks are being taught. Something to remind all of us that teach Sunday school classes or teachers in the school, because another paradox, one of the best ways to learn is to teach. And your argument is that we should never stop learning. We should never stop teaching. And it seems to me that some people get to a point, Randall, where they're sort of an autopilot. They sort of said, I've read all the books I'm going to read. I've done all the teaching. I've done all the ministry I'm going to do. And that's not exactly the lesson from Braveheart or from your book, is it?
No, it isn't, Kerby. And in a certain way, listen, I am as susceptible to every flaw that I talk about, and I probably talk about them because I've experienced them in my own life, my own flaws. But to me, where that comes from, that, well, I've said everything I'm going to say and done everything I'm going to do, is kind of violating the first commandment. God is God, not us. God's got a say about what God wants us to do beyond what we think we've done. So one of the things I found in my life was that God has plans that are way better than my own plans. I remember teaching a Sunday school class with a really wide span of people, some very young people and some much more mature people, and I challenged purpose lies in the mission field, but he also made me fast, and when I run, I feel his pleasure. Yes. It gives me goosebumps just to say. and I said that in my class, and I said, what do you do that when you do it, you feel God's pleasure? And there was an older lady, well into her 70s, that was sitting in the back of the class, and she was sort of staring at the ceiling, and I thought, well, she's not really interested in this, she's not relating, and 2 weeks later, I'm passing through a hall of the church, and she stopped me, and she said, you know, you said that, and I thought, what I love is teaching children. And I stopped doing it because I thought, I'm so old, and they're so young, and what do I have to give them? And she said, I realized I have to go back to teaching the little ones, the preschoolers that I used to teach. A week later, I passed, and she was teaching my son. And that was like one of those things that says to me, God has a purpose. He puts words into our heart. We speak the words that give us goosebumps, like me telling that quote gives me goosebumps to say, brings tears to my eyes. Mm-hmm. It affected her, and what I guess she heard was not even so much the substance, but that I was speaking of an approach that I was trying to live myself, even by teaching Sunday school myself, and she was hearing that and saying, I'm going to change. I'm not going to sit in my room and say I'm too old, I'm too whatever. God still had gifts for her to give, and in giving those gifts, she got a gift, and that, to me, is how the Braveheart Life works.
Living the Braveheart Life is the title of the book, subtitle, Finding the Courage to Follow Your Heart, and we're talking with Randall Wallace. One other question certainly surfaces early on in your book, or at least a whole chapter midway through the book, and that is, what is a warrior? Now, if I were to go out right now with my microphone and to the street and ask some people to define a warrior, most of them would say, well, I guess it's like a soldier. And you say, well, a warrior is much more than a soldier. How so?
Well, a soldier only knows to attack. A soldier is, in some ways, in our definitions of the words, we think of a soldier as a kind of a military pawn. But a warrior knows that sometimes you have to retreat, sometimes you have to suffer, sometimes you're lost and confused, and you're always in the hand of God. You're always watching to say, something's happening. We didn't know how it would be. William Wallace in Braveheart understands that he can fight for the rest of his life, but he won't achieve what he wants to achieve. He has to trust himself even unto the people that he knows have betrayed him before and probably will betray him again, but he trusts God's purpose greater than the power of his own life. And you know, one of the things I love to say about warriors is that women are truly warriors. My grandmother she had a broken hip prior to their ability to repair hips like they can today, and she was in constant pain, constantly. She should have been crippled by it by all practical means, but
let me step in. We have to take one of those mandatory breaks. I want to hear about that, but we've got to take a mandatory break. We'll come back and continue our conversation with Randall Wallace right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Continue our conversation for a few more minutes with Randall Wallace as we talk about his book, Living the Braveheart Life, Finding the Courage to Follow Your Heart. You always have to be real careful to interrupt such a great storyteller as a person like Randall Wallace, but we have a mandatory break, so the breaks wait for no one, but I'd love to hear the rest of the story.
Well, really quickly, my grandmother, beside her bed, had in the top drawer of her bedside table was a Bible, and that Bible had the tears and the prayers of her whole life, and we would never touch her Bible, the 9 grandchildren. But under that Bible was a pistol, And and if she heard a noise at night in her farmhouse way out in the country, you would hear that drawer slide open, and she would pull out that pistol and walk outside. And sometimes I never heard her fire a round out of that pistol, but one of my cousins did. If somebody came to her house and wanted food and asked for it, she would give them anything she had. But if you came to steal from her, then you would get a round fired over your head, and then the next one might be right through your head. And my grandmother was a warrior, but the one of the places where she battled was when I was a baby and I had asthma. She would hold me all night long and look at me and sing to me and tell me stories from her life and from the Bible, and that kept me alive and breathing through long, long nights of having asthma. That, to me, is a warrior, too.
That's amazing. You know, in the final chapters, you talk about the holes in our armor as well as outlaw Christianity, but talk about how people can take some of these principles in certainly your book, as well as, of course, principles in the Bible, and live a godly life, and to be courageous, but to also be following God's call and to be effective and to do what God has called them to do.
Well, I believe it begins with the humility of accepting that there is a God and it's not us. And yet the great gift that God has given us is life, that God gives us that life in every moment. And the enemy, the power of darkness, uses, Satan, let's be clear, uses fear and self-righteousness and judgment to rob that life from us and rob us from sharing that life with other people. And I believe that the way the Braveheart Life works is that we fall ourselves into the arms of God. We recognize that everyone has wounds. I mean, Jesus chose the disciples, handpicked them, and yet those very same people, having been with him for 3 years in the presence of Jesus of Nazareth, still ran away from him, betrayed him, left him alone. That we all have these flaws. I think that when we pretend we don't have wounds, when we don't have brokenness, then we are robbing ourselves of the comfort of knowing that God loves us just like we are. That, to me, is how we spread this Braveheart life, by accepting who we are and accepting who God is, particularly as God has shown himself in Jesus the Christ.
Let's, if we can, just before I let you go, talk about what's available on your website. We have a link there, livingthebraveheartlife.com. Now, you don't have to type all that out. We've got a link. You can just click on it. And, of course, there's a way that people can purchase the book. But you also have some kind of action items. And, Randall, one of the things we always encourage people to do is take action. There's a place, first of all, where you can watch some videos. There's also where you can create your badge. Talk about that, if you might, for just a minute.
Yeah, we want people to be able to say, what do you fight for? Maybe you don't fight like our soldiers do with a rifle in physical terms, but or maybe you do. But what is it that you're fighting for, and how do you fight? We want people to be able to share what it is they fight for. We want people to be able to reflect on what their own Braveheart moment is in their life. That's something that I hope that when people read the stories in Living the Braveheart Life, they'll say to themselves, well, I do this some myself already. And by focusing on that, you then have a clearer path for that you're not wrong when you're lost. And we hope people will share how they've been lost, how they've handled it, and how they found their path on the Braveheart Life.
I just mentioned, too, you have some videos there, and some of the people that are on the videos are people that have been on this program. Of course, yourself, Jimmy Wayne, David and Jason Benham, who've been in studio with us, and some others. So you can actually watch some of those videos, pass them on to others, get a lot more information. Of course, most importantly, get a copy of the book. I would think you'd be able to find it in your local bookstore. It is about 200 pages. And it is published by Thomas Nelson. Look for it in your local bookstore. If not, we have a link so that you can order it there. And so I just appreciate so much, Randall, you joining us today here on Point of View.
Kerby, it's a great honor to be with you. A real joy, and thank you so much.
Well, thank you for writing the book. Thank you for such great films. And thank you for giving us a better part of an hour today. So we have to do it again. Just before we run out of time, though, let me mention real quickly that we do have an action item for you in addition to this one. And that is, we a little bit earlier talked with Margie Dannenfelser, and that is a debate taking place right now in the United States Senate on the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act. If you go to our website, pointofview.net, you will see the take action item there, or if you receive emails from me, and I sent this out a while ago, you should have received it by now. It's in your inbox. It gives you an opportunity to contact your two senators, and I think it is important, as we've mentioned, that wherever your senator is, perhaps you are fortunate to live in a state where your senator is going to vote for this and has been pro-life and really stands strong on Christian principles, you still need to say thank you to them. And if you're in a situation where maybe you, as I know many of our listeners are, in particular states where you know that neither of your senators are that supportive of pro-life issues, they still need to hear from you. And then, of course, we also mentioned, as we went through the list, there are quite a number of you that live in states where your senator is sort of on the line. We're not quite sure how he or she is going to vote. Your particular email is really important. Of course, you can also make a phone call as well. So we give you the information. If you only have a few minutes, then just hit that Take Action button. It asks for your name and address so that will then surface the fact that your two senators. We have given you a sample message, real simple and real straightforward. You can modify it however you want. And then when you are done filling that out, you hit Submit, and you've done your duty. Now, if you'd like to call the Capitol Switchboard, you can do that as well, and we've given that number out before, and that information's on our website as well. But whatever you do, please take the time to really, in this particular case, make sure that your two senators know where you stand on this issue. It's very, very important, and so we really want to encourage you as much as possible to take an action on that particular issue. Now, tomorrow, we're going to have Frank Miniter with us. He's going to talk about some of these Second Amendment issues, and we have certainly seen that as an ongoing battle, so we'll certainly spend some time with him. Then we have David Quatreau, and he is actually the author of Urban Legends of the New Testament, some misunderstandings and some actually fables and false ideas that people have of the Bible. So I think you're going to enjoy those conversations. And along the way, we're going to get into some other issues that are certainly front and center. Certainly Ben Carson saying that there should not be a Muslim in the White House. That's caused some controversy. Some that have been very critical of some of the things that Donald Trump has said. That's certainly in the news as well. So do it all through the week, and I hope you'll join us every single pointofview.net. You can go there to find information. Take action. Please go to pointofview.net and find. I want to thank Andrew, Catherine, and Chris for their help. We'll see you back here tomorrow.
Elvis Presley once said, "When things go wrong, don't go with them." Now, I don't know what you think about Elvis. The point I want to drive home, yes, it's been a difficult year, but instead of giving up, we should double up. Double our efforts to communicate the truth about Jesus Christ. Double our time countering the false views around us. And double your partnership with Point of View, because helping you do those things is a big part of our mission. Now through September 30th, a gracious friend of the ministry is going to double your support on his own. So when I said I want you to double your partnership, do I want you to dig even deeper? Absolutely. But no matter what you give, up to $50,000, this friend will double that. So double up. This is a great time to make your first gift ever. Call 800-347-5151 or give online at pointofview.net. Please don't fret. Invest. Pray. Let's do this. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.